Do you recommit that every single school in Australia will receive dollar for dollar the same federal funding over the next 4 years?
Well, the good news is because we now have funding agreements, or in principle funding agreements, with Western Australia, Queensland and the Northern Territory, and because we've been able to find $1.2 billion to put back into the model that Bill Shorten cut, we can say that every school in Australia will get more funding and will not be worse off because of anything that the Commonwealth does. Because, as you would know, the states in the end apply the model, but what the Commonwealth is doing means that no school, state or territory can be worse off because of the Commonwealth's actions.
We'll go around the circle. Let's start with you, Andrew.
Mr. Pyne, this is your third iteration of this speech, policy in a week. You had $1.2 billion missing. By the next day, you found $230 million, and a week later, you found $1.2 billion at the back of the sofa. How do we know you're not making this up on the run?
Could I, Andrew, if I may, defend and support my minister here? We want to ensure confidence and certainty in the system that has been so demoralised by the uncertainty which Labor has delivered. So at the beginning of last week, knowing that there was a meeting of the State and Territory Education Ministers, Minister Pyne put $230 million in to ensure that there was certainty for next year. Knowing that we wanted to get certainty for 4 years, Minister Pyne worked with the non-signatory states and territory to get the in-principle agreement that we've now got. Now that we've got an agreement that will mean that we can have a fair and national system, we've put all of the $1.2 billion back. Dennis?
Prime Minister, where does this, it's a 4-year deal you're talking about, where does this leave the states who had already signed up and signed up to 6 years?
Well, we've never committed to years 5 and 6. There's $10 billion which the former government promised in years 5 and 6. I don't believe that any of the states thought that they would ever get that money from the Rudd-Gillard government. I think they all thought that that money was essentially pie in the sky. We will deliver 4-year funding certainty. Funding agreements in education have traditionally been 4-year agreements, so we've now got a 4-year funding agreement in principle in place, and obviously there are reviews built in to the system. Those reviews will take place and we'll negotiate a new agreement at the appropriate time. We'll go, Lenore.
In the deals that you've done, is there any requirement that the states don't reduce their funding as you increase yours, in other words, cost you?
We would certainly regard it as very poor form for the states to reduce their funding because they're getting extra funding from the Commonwealth. But what we don't want is to micromanage the states. What we don't want is to try to run public schools out of Canberra. And that was the problem with the original deal that the former government did. There were these management plans which the minister in Canberra could put in place. There were inspectors from Canberra. There was a whole lot of extra data gathering from Canberra. We're going to dispense with all of that, but obviously we want, as a result of this extra funding from the Commonwealth, to ensure that all schools gain money.
Is
David?
$1.2 billion all from the Commonwealth?
That's
it couldn't
correct.
be found on Friday at the meeting with the ministers. Where have you found it over the weekend? Is this adding to the deficit?
We have identified appropriate savings over and above the savings that we identified prior to the election, and we will be making clear how we are funding this when the mid-year, the MyEFO statement comes out in December. Let's move across. Sabra.
Victoria, they forced you into a $1 billion backflip.
Well, no, that's not true. We have been working calmly, steadily, methodically, purposefully through all of this. As I've indicated, with the ministerial meeting due on Friday of last week, we indicated at the beginning of the week that there would be funding certainty for the 2014 school year, which the states and territories were entitled to. but now that Minister Pyne has been working diligently with his state counterparts to get this in principle national agreement, we can put the other money in.
So will you Mr Abbott, honour to the letter the deals that have been struck with New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania over the next 4 years?
That is certainly our intention. I suspect that New South Wales and Victoria will be happy to lose the Canberra command and control elements of those deals, but certainly the financial arrangements for the next 4 years will be absolutely adhered to.
So with cleaning up Labor's mess, do you accept that in the past few days for voters and parents and teachers this has seemed like a bit of a mess and now you're trying to clean it up today?
Well, I think we've given a candid explanation of what we've been doing ever since the election, as Minister Pyne has made clear. We have been talking with the states and territories. We had the ministerial meeting coming up last Friday. It was important going into that meeting that there was funding certainty for next year, but we always wanted to try to ensure funding certainty for the 4 years, and now that we've got the in-principle agreement of the non-signatory states, we can give that. As I think Christopher said in a press conference last week, there's $230 million which is on the table now, which is there now, and I hope to be able to make more available in the near future, and that's exactly what we've done. Sid?
Just on another matter, are you, just given the latest story in The Guardian, are you confident that Australian intelligence agencies have acted in compliance with Australian law at all times in the past few years? And secondly, has Edward Snowden, in your opinion, acted within Australian law, and is Australia thinking of taking any action against him?
Sid, I think that as far as is possible, intelligence matters are probably best dealt with by way of parliamentary statement. I've asked the Attorney-General, Senator Brandis, to make a statement in the Senate on these matters when the Senate resumes shortly. If I could make a couple of general points, though. First of all, we, as an Australian government, I'm sure this is true of governments of both persuasions, will always act to safeguard our national interest and to protect our citizens. But our security organisations will always act in accordance with the law, and they will always act with appropriate safeguards in place. And as you know, intelligence gathering is subject to supervision by the Joint Parliamentary Committee. It's also subject to supervision, very close supervision, from the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security. I'm confident that we've got all the relevant safeguards in place, and I have no reason to think that any Australian intelligence organisation has not acted in accordance with Australian law.
Prime Minister, just back to education funding, what is going to be cut to find this $1.2 billion?
We have identified what we think are perfectly suitable savings that won't involve particular difficulties for parents, teachers, students, and we'll be announcing those in the MyEFO statement in a week or so's time. We'll go back around. Dennis?
Prime Minister, do you now accept that if you hadn't done what you've done today and announced this $1.2 billion extra, that you would have broken an election promise?
No. What we're doing today is we are not only keeping our commitments, we are more than keeping our commitments, because our commitment was to spend the same quantum of money over the 4 years that the former government was proposing to spend. And as you know, the former government ripped $1.2 billion out a few weeks before polling day. I appreciate that this probably wasn't heavily dealt with during the campaign, which is why perhaps some people were surprised. And look, as far as I'm concerned, we want to keep our commitments in spirit as well as in letter, and that's precisely what we're doing. Today we aren't just keeping our commitments, we're more than keeping our commitments, and we are doing our absolute level best to keep faith with the Australian people, because that was the problem with the former government. They repeatedly failed to keep faith with the Australian people, and this government is not going to fall into that trap. Phil?
back to Mark Riley's question, just to nail this down, with the deals that have already been signed in New South Wales, so will the exact terms and conditions of those deals as signed with Labor apply for 4 years, or is it just the funding is now guaranteed for 4 years?
Yeah.
The funding is obviously guaranteed. In fact, we've added to it the $1.2 billion for the 3 non-funded states. We've always said that we would reduce the command and control features in the Australian Education Act, and we will do that, which will obviously impact on all the signatory states and the non-signatory states, and I think that'll be welcomed by the states and territories. But there is no plan to alter the way that the model will be delivered in the signatory states into the future. There was conditionality attached to that, of course. That won't apply to Western Australia, the Northern Territory and Queensland, and we would expect the signatory states to keep the promises that they've made, but at the end of the day, that is a matter for those sovereign jurisdictions. But in the model, there is an inbuilt review, of course, in 2015 to make sure that the model is operating effectively, and we will adopt that. And can I just add that this now allows us to focus on the things that matter in education beyond funding, like teacher quality, more local decision-making, the curriculum and parental engagement. In other words, the debate should now shift to quality and standards rather than simply always being mired in funding.
Who hasn't had a question?
This fellow over here hasn't, and he was on the list.
How will funding actually be applied in those non-signatory states? I mean, will they be an extension of the basic Gonski model, or are you going to be using the SES model? How is it actually going to be worked out?
The model that we've now got.
What we said was that we would honour the agreements and we would match the offers, and they were offers based on, I think it's called the schools resources model, student resources model. So that's the one we're proceeding with.